To this story now, the Phala Phala scandal, the high cost of living, unemployment and poverty, these remain the bane of Cyril Ramaphosa's existence. The ANC's head of Presidency, Sibongile Besani, is defending the president. He says the attacks against Ramaphosa over the weekend were unfair. Ramaphosa was criticized by his predecessor, former President Thabo Mbeki, Kgalema Motlanthe, as well as Jacob Zuma. Mbeki said the ANC should not avoid discussing whether it would ask Ramaphosa to step aside if the panel appointed by Parliament would find he had an impeachable case to answer to. In another swipe, Zuma called Ramaphosa corrupt. Let's discuss now this with Besani. He joins us in studio. Good morning, Sibongile. Thank you very much for your time.
Good morning and thanks for having me.
It's been quite a busy weekend this past weekend. We had the three former presidents. We also then had the current sitting president addressing the nation. If we had to start with the implementation plan, I'm sure you've seen the mixed views on it, quite critical, many of those being political parties. You are defending the president. As a start, if we look at what was stated prefacing that implementation plan, the president went on to make that bold statement that indeed state capture existed. He concurred with Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Something that is quite interesting because within the African National Congress, there are leaders that even this weekend were saying state capture doesn't exist. It was a creation of third forces or those that were seeking to push regime change. Where does the ANC presidency stand on the existence of state capture?
The ANC position on the State Capture Commission has never been a very dubious one. Number one, the creation of the State Capture Commission, if you remember, it flew from the public protector. Then the ANC conference in 2017 resolved to have a judicial commission of inquiry. So we can't mince words about that. So we wouldn't have adopted a resolution to undertake this commission of inquiry if we did not believe that there is something wrong. And close to about 5,000 delegates of the ANC. So there can't be two tongues about it. The commission has gone through its inquiry and made findings. And those findings, the president made an undertaking that he will provide the action plan on those findings on the 22nd of October, and that's what happened. And beyond that, beyond just providing the responses on the action plan and so on, the president also shared this action plan with the nation.
Now let's get to the key reforms. Actually, before we get to it, let's talk about another statement he made. He took it upon himself in that address to remind citizens that as per the Constitution, the president is not bound by the recommendations of the Commission. Some even criticize that very aspect. Some, even political parties again, saying that then what was it all for? 1 billion later and so many years later, if there's going to be a variation in the implementation of the recommendations. What do you believe some fail to appreciate about this creature of statute when we talk about a commission of inquiry and its limitations?
No, the president was not actually watering down the findings of the Commission of Inquiry. What is factually correct is that when an inquiry has been made, you reflect on the findings and you look at the recommendations. And based on the recommendation, you take a different approach. You are stating a fact on how the findings are actually treated. It was not watering them down. That is why the president was emphatic in saying that there was indeed state capture. But then with regards to how we treat or how we action some of the recommendations and findings, the president then categorized various findings. Others have to be dealt with. About 200 of them, they are criminal, more like criminal in nature. Others have to be dealt through the process of the Constitution and so on. So the issue is the president needed to make a point that once a commission of inquiry has been concluded, it has made recommendations. We must know it doesn't bind. But as the ANC, as the presidency, there is commitment to act, even though it doesn't bind, but there is commitment to act. That is why he has referred all these findings, recommendations to various institutions. I think the essence here is that in as much as the president made the statement, which is a statement of fact about how findings of the commission should be treated. Yes. But he demonstrated quite comprehensively on the actions that would be taken based on those particular findings.
So if there's just cause, then you would have a deviation as to whether you implement or not.
Yeah.
But then let's get to those key reforms. The very sticky point is one around cadre deployment. It would be remiss of me not to start there. We'll go to the law enforcement agencies and every other reform that was mentioned there. But if we start with the cadre deployment, there was no mention of it, something that others criticized as well. And the only sort of connection one could make as to why it wouldn't have been mentioned is if we had to go through previous court papers where the state president responded to the Democratic Alliance, that in those papers he stated that the Zondo Commission had not necessarily said cadre deployment should be done away with. But then there's the argument that in as much as it wasn't prescriptive or stated categorically that it must be done away with, but something should be done nevertheless. So for there to be nothing mentioned of it when it was said it was significant in enabling state capture, then for there to be nothing said of it, was that not a missed opportunity?
No, it is not a missed opportunity. I think you just answered yourself on the fact that in as much as the Commission was not prescriptive, you know, but what is very clear is that something should be dealt, it's something that should be done with it. And you should remember the issue of deployment is not something I knew in any political environment. If you look at a party that has been successful for almost since 1959, like the People's Action Party of Singapore, it's a party that has been involved in deploying its cadres, but it has an improved approach. And we're drawing lessons from even the Communist Party of China. It does use the cadre deployment, and there are lessons to draw from that. So, and that is what the ANC is actually working on. That is why a part of our deployment, especially during local government elections, even selection and election of mayors, be it premiers, we have actually improved on that. We're not saying it is perfect. But we, as the ANC, we have demonstrated that we realize, we concede that there has been some mistakes, but we're improving on them. That's why mayors go through interviews. That's why even premiers go through interviews. And that process is rigor, and we are also going to improve on the rigor of that particular process, because we are learning from parties that have been so successful, like PAP in Singapore, Communist Party of China, others even in Indonesia and so on. So we're learning from them to improve on how we manage deployment of cadres, because we cannot be a political party that leaves everything in the hands of people that do not share the same perspective as ours.
But why did that not find expression in the president's address? Because that became the concern, that he made no mention. The ANC is among those entities or institutions that were forwarded the report for consideration and action. You were among those, particularly because you were mentioned in the Zondo Commission. So why did these actions or decisions that you guys are now taking, corrective steps, why did they not find expression in the president's statement? Would you say then that South Africans are justified in saying there should have been at least one sentence around this?
Look, if you remember, the state president was, President Ramaphosa was making reference, was making responses on the action with regards to how cabinet, how government is going to do that. The ANC has deliberated on the matter, and part of our pronouncements at a later stage will make reference to how we're going to ensure that cadre deployment is done in a proper way, in a manner that embraces, that acknowledges the skills or taps into the skills and expertise of brother South Africans.
And then just in closing, the criticism though from the former presidents, what did you make of it? Because we even spoke yesterday to Bheki Mtolo from KZN, who actually was quite concerned about the platform to address issues of concern if indeed they are legitimate.
Look, as the ANC and as presidency of the ANC, we are not averse, or we don't have difficulty with criticism from anywhere, be it the comrades and members of the ANC. However, we need to indicate that in as much as we accept criticism, so it does not mean we are going to agree with each and every criticism that comes our way. For an example, part of the problem that we have is how some of the arguments that are being couched, how they are couched to advance a particular view. In the ANC, there's a practice that when a decision has been made, That is the decision of the collective, and it has to be communicated as such.
Democratic centralism.
Democratic central, even collective leadership. Let's talk about collective leadership as a practice. So in other words, if I was in a meeting, I made my view, and then I lose the argument, what is going to be communicated is the decision of the collective, not how I felt, whether, Now, part of the concern that we saw is that we had an instance where views were advanced, and as they were being advanced, they were couched in such a way that a certain member said this, as if, this member said that, no, you are eroding collective leadership. Imagine a situation where every member says, no, even as much as you took that decision, but this is what I said. We can't couch our views in such a way. We feel that part of the limitation on is how some of the criticism were couched. They were couched in such a way they undermine the principle of collective leadership also, because part of these debates, or how they were couched in such a way, they create the impression that, no, the NEC is useless, it doesn't...
But these are former leaders who are familiar with the Constitution and how you should conduct yourself publicly. Will you be calling them out? Will there be a closed meeting where they are addressed on how going forward they should tackle criticism, or how they should bring issues so important to them?
In the spirit of embracing the very same criticism, they will be criticized too, and will engage them at various platforms. And with regards to the fact, this criticism that President Ramaphosa is corrupt, we believe that such a criticism is disingenuous. Is corrupt on the basis of him conducting business. When President Ramaphosa became deputy president, that he made declarations, and those declarations were actually modeled in line with how, when you are president, in line with the regulations that govern that. You can't come later and say, no, the president cannot do this, as if he never declared that, therefore, on that basis, is corrupt. We find that disingenuous.